So I'm going to be showing you this file, obviously, in InDesign to go over linking images, modifying linked images. We're going to look at some resolution issues quickly, and also placing vector graphics, which we have done before in the last project with the Oahu magazine cover. That living graphic that we placed in Illustrator, that living graphic that we placed in the file was actually a vector graphic. And we have worked with placing text. You can place Word files or other text files directly into your files. So we'll be going over that. Now, you don't have to place just one image at a time. You can place multiple images, which is a nice feature. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our, if I can do it here. There we go. Select our graphic boxes that we want to place images in. And we're going to go to File, Place. I don't know why it took me so long to find it. File, Place, just like any other, placing any other image. And I'm going to go to our Chapter 6 folder. And we have a bunch of images to choose from. So I'm just going to choose. So if you click once here, if you hold Command on a Mac, I believe Control on a PC, you can select multiple. We'll go with, how many do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4. So as I'm holding Command, you can see it's allowing me to select multiple images. It's allowing me to click and select multiple images. If you hold, usually when you're selecting multiple things, if you hold Shift to select multiple things, if you hold Shift while selecting, it will select everything in between. Like I chose the black one PSD and then the flower PSD. It chooses everything in between. So that's why you want to hold Command. That's the difference. So we're holding Command instead of Shift. 2, 3. We'll do this one. And then you're going to hit Open just like anything else, just like placing any other image. And you can see, it's kind of hard to see. You'll see it when you place it on your machine, but I'm kind of wiggling my mouse so you can kind of see it. You see that image, and then the number, that tiny little number in the corner there, it says how many images are loaded to place, basically. So there's 4 images loaded to place. And basically you're going to be selecting where you're going to place these images, and just selecting and clicking, and then we'll have to adjust these later because they're way bigger than what we're placing them into. So that's placing multiple images. Basically you're doing file place like you would with a single image, and instead of just placing a single image, you're command selecting multiple images and then clicking them into where you want them to go. The number of images I went through. 2 commands that we're going to be using a lot with the object commands, we've used a little bit already, is the frame fitting commands. The 2 most common ones to use are filling the frame proportionally or fit content proportionally. So filling the frame proportionally scales the graphic so that it fits within your frame without distorting the graphic. Fill content proportionally scales the graphic so that the entire graphic is visible into any size frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our frame. We're going to go to Object and Fitting, and you'll see we have these 2. So we have Fill Frame Proportionally. Let's see if there's a difference here to show you. Fitting. Or Fill Content Proportionally. And that didn't really change because it's a squarish image. But those are the 2 that we're going to generally be using. Let's see if this one does it differently. There we go. So this one fits a little worse in this case, which is what I wanted. You'll see when we did fill content proportionally, it basically scales the image. It's essentially scaling it so the largest side fits within your frame. So it's fitting the width, the max width within this frame. And then you'll see, obviously, we don't have enough room to fill the frame. So we're going to go back to fill frame proportionally. And that basically takes whatever's missing there. It basically made the height of our frame there. And you can see it kind of crops it a little bit. But you can see, we'll go back to this one. Let's try, we'll do proportionally again. Now you can see we have the exact opposite. There's not enough width. So we're going to fit the frame, which basically fills the frame. It adjusts it without proportionally, basically means that it doesn't squish the image or distort the image. And then I'll do the same thing again here. I'm going to do proportionally first just to show you again. You see we don't have the width. I'm going to fit the frame. So now you can see, and then you can do some minor adjustments from there. And you can see again when we click that, our little target there, it shows you the image frame. So we have a lot of room here. We can bump it up or adjust after we fit the frame. And that's basically placing multiple images, fitting content, which we've worked with a little bit. We're going to work with more in depth in this chapter. But those are, you'll see that there's a bunch of different fitting options. But basically the two most common ones that you're going to be using are fitting the frame and fitting the content. Generally fitting the frame, I tend to use, most commonly I tend to use fitting the frame just because I find it easier to use and then adjust later. Again, people have different workflows and what works for them a little bit better. But again, I tend to fit the frame rather than adjust my frame to the content. I adjust my content to the frame because I like to design similar to this. When we first opened it, when we had kind of like when we're thumbnailing, you know, we had our design, we had our empty boxes. Like I like to design with content in mind, but without placing the content as I go. I like to design my layout first, and then I'll place my content, and then fit my content to my layout. So after we've placed images, one of the handiest, or probably most handy, palette that we'll use, or at least that I use in general, is our links palette. So this is where we talked about linked files versus embedded. InDesign and Illustrator automatically link files, so they don't embed unless you ask them to embed. So you generally don't have to worry about it. But you'll see here we have our 4 that we placed, and then we have these 3 that were in the file. It tells you, you know, like that first one, the black one PSD. It tells you the file. If you hover over it, it gives you the quick info. So it tells you the location. It's on my hard drive. It's in my spring folder in week 6, in week 6 materials. Same thing for this. So it'll tell you the name and also the file extension, so you know that these are Word documents, these are Photoshop documents. Where we have our these warnings, when these come up, they just tell you that things are either missing or have been modified. So if they've modified this on purpose before opening the file. So this tells you that, and if you hover over it, it's been modified. You can double click to update. So we've updated it, and now you can see that the resolution, even in the preview, let me see if I can undo that. Even in the preview, you'll see that our resolution here is pretty terrible because it's essentially just using this as like a placeholder because the link has been modified. So when we double click it to update that modification, you'll see it's still in preview mode. So we're going to do overprint preview to see, and it gets marginally better. A lot of these files are working files or just example files, so they're not exactly the greatest, but you can see it's way better than when we had it unmodified, if that's a word. So let's double click to modify that. We'll double click the Word files. So it says here, edits have been made, and if we update it, we'll lose the edits that we made within the document. I think I changed the font, so it's going to tell me. There we go. It shouldn't. I technically changed the font because I had a different version of Garamond in here, which is a system font. So I thought I was going to lose that font. So I modified, what that warning was telling me that it was modified within the document. And basically all I did was when I opened this, let's double check the text here just to show you guys. Yeah. When I opened this, I guess they had a slightly different, this is where fonts get tricky. I had a slightly different version of Garamond, which is a system font, so I don't know why I would have a different version, but so I changed before class, I changed the font. So that's what it was telling me, that I actually made changes to the document, to the Word document within. I made changes to the text within the Illustrator, within the InDesign file. So if I updated it to reflect the changes within the linked file, I was going to lose the changes that I made. But it must have just been a little goofy glitch because it went back to Garamond and everything's fine. Oops. So working with linked images in your links palette can be a little bit tricky. It's similar to how web links work, linked images on websites, things like that. So if you're kind of familiar with that, it may help. It's a similar concept. Again, so like I'm sure you guys have all gone to a website where linked images don't work. You go to a website and there's basically like a little page with a tear icon or some kind of icon indicating an image is missing. It's basically the same thing. If you're, let's say, for whatever reason we're missing this image, it would either low res render like it was, or it would just be missing entirely. It would just be the frame. It would just be showing you the frame instead of a low res preview. And if you needed to replace it, or you want to relink for any reason, you do that through your links palette. And what you can do, again, with any info, there we go. So we hover over and we show you the info, which you can also get here. And you don't have to show this. Generally, I kind of hide this unless I need it. But this is your main info. You can see it's got a lot of info on the document here. So it's got your name, the type of document it is. It's a Photoshop document. The page that it's on page 2, which is here. The status of it, it's linked and works fine. The size, the color profile, it's RGB. Any kind of layer overrides, there's none. When we'll talk about this a little bit later, but pixels per inch, when we talk about printing, actual pixels per inch is 144. Effective pixels per inch is 568. I'll go over that a little bit later. That's going to basically be actual resolution versus effective resolution. Is essentially like effective resolution is how much sizing you can get away with before an image distorts, essentially. If you have a low res, let's say for example you have a low res image, but you're putting it in a document that's like, I don't know, like a business card, like super tiny, you're putting it into something that's like 2 by 3 inches. If it's low res, you might be able to get away with it, depending on how low res it is. if you're working with like an 8.5 by 11 document and you have something that's 72 DPI, you may be able to get away with placing it and having the resolution be okay because of the small size of the image. So that's where they talk about effective resolution. Like if you have something that's an image that's 10 by 10 at 72 DPI and you try to place it for like a 24 by 36 poster to fill the entire poster, that's obviously not going to work because the image is going to be, the image is only 10 by 10 and you're stretching it up to, what did I say, 24, 36. So you're basically bumping up that resolution, or not bumping up the resolution, but you're taxing that resolution to more than double the size. So you're going to have image breakdown. So the effective resolution is only going to be at 10 by 10. The effective resolution is going to be 72 DPI. At 5 by 5, the effective resolution is going to double, 150, and then vice versa. At 20 by 20, it's going to cut that 72 DPI in half. We'll go over it a little bit more. Anyway, and then it says we have your dimensions, the creator, how many layers, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll see a ton more information beyond hovering over this image. So let's say you wanted to use a different image in your document. I'm going to hide that. We have a bunch of different options here. So we have the relink option, go to link, which is super handy. If you don't know, let's say if you don't know the names or you can't really see in the preview, if you don't know the names of these and you want to directly go to this link, like I'll show you, physically go to the link to work on moving it around, you can hit go to link and it'll sort of move, it'll force your view to that link. So let's say we want to go to Wally over here, or go to PD and work on it. So you can hit that go to link. I use that really, really frequently, especially when I'm getting files from clients that have a bunch of linked images, and I have, people call images, like clearly, people call images generally whatever makes sense to them, which might not always be what makes sense to a majority of people. So like these kind of make sense, obviously these are, this one's puppies, so you can imagine it's a picture of puppies. But some of the ones that are named, again, if we had like 10 images in here and they were all named after the dogs' names, like I don't know, again, if that preview was harder to see, obviously it's not too difficult to try to see which is which, but like PD kind of looks like that one, but maybe not. Well, let's just go to the link and then it drives your view right to the link, which is nice. So let's say we wanted to replace PD. You can use this relink, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes this happens when you're missing a link. If one of the more common things for clients to do is or at least in my experience, is they'll rename an image. Like they'll have something called, like let's say they have this one called Black 1 PSD, and they realize that they named all these, the names of the dogs, and they decide to just change the name of Black to, I don't know, Bob.psd. So sometimes you might have to relink. It'll say it's missing, but they just changed the name. So you need to relink. You hit that relink button, and then let's go to our chapter 6. And then you find, let's say Blake. They've just changed the name of Black to Blake. I know I'm on a different thing here, but let's say we change PD to Blake. You basically just drive to it as if you're placing the image. And what that does is it replaces the image. And generally what it does is it uses the same fittings. Let's see if we can undo. It generally uses the same fittings and placements. Here, let's replace. Okay, so let's say we wanted to replace the Black image, or again, a client changed the name from Blake to Black, or Black to Blake. It's a little confusing, which honestly happens more often than you would think, where clients change a name to a file because it makes more sense, like as far as like image naming, but they don't take into consideration that the file's already being used. A lot of times people will not think about linked images, or they just don't know. So they change a name. So then a lot of times I'll have to drive to, so I'll hit the image that I want to replace. And then let's say we go to Blake, and like that's the image that looks similar to you. Usually I'll get like some kind of low res preview, like a JPEG or a PDF or something to see. And you drive to the file that you want to replace, and then we've replaced it. So that's basically using our links palette to replace either correct or replace images. And again, you can do that pretty simply. Let's say we wanted to, again, replace our PD image with something else. You hit that little link option, and then again you get our previews here of the image. Just trying to think if there's any other link information that we need to know. Sorry, just looking through my notes. Yeah, so basically with linked images, when you place like I said, when you place a graphic or text, that the file basically remembers the path on your computer. So when you're working on your own documents, again, if you're using your own images and you're working off of your own hard drive, and let's say you even want to bring that into the lab to work on it, you want to make sure that you have all of your files. Generally, I tend to have a file. I'll make a file for each document that I'm making, and then I'll have an images file, a folder rather, and then inside that folder I'll have my InDesign file, and then I'll create an images file that I'll keep all my images in. So that way, if I'm moving it to a hard drive to work on it on another machine, I just move that entire folder, the entire main folder, so that way I'm not moving images around, I'm not losing images. You want to make sure if you're working on your own machine, you want to bring all of those images that you've used in a document with you, or you will be missing links. And then occasionally, when like we've done, when you open a file for the first time on a new machine, it'll say that it's found linked images. Do you want to update them? And you hit yes, because it knows the path of the images and links within the document. Let me just show you really quick. Let's hide InDesign, and I'm going to move. I want to show you what a missing link looks like. Okay, so there's Blake. Just wanted to see which one we're doing. Blake PSD. So let's take Blake and we'll move him out of this folder. So doing something just as simple, which with clients that I work with happens more often than not, doing something as simple as just moving an image out of the folder that it was in. Hopefully, there we go. You can see now we get this sort of stop sign with a question mark, basically telling us that we're missing a link. And basically what we've done, again, similar to websites, is we've broken that link by moving it out of the folder that it was in. So we've broken the path. Let's hover over it to show. So the path, it's looking for that image within that crazy long number chapter 6 folder, which it's no longer in. So you have a couple options. Is you can either double click to relink, and we know we put it here, so you can relink to it, or you can, if you know you moved it by accident, you can put it back in the folder that it was in. So let's just relink just to show you. So now we've relinked that image, and everything is fine. So when you get that missing links images, in one of our assignments there are purposely missing links you need to modify. You just need to double click that warning and then drive to. You can hover over or you can show your info, and it tells you the path again, or hover over to where it is. Now you can see the new path. It's not looking for it in that chapter folder. To correct those links. So resolution issues, I went over it just a little bit. You'll see, we'll zoom in. You know, again, a lot of these files for the book are pretty much sample files. They get into better resolution, having better resolution files later, but we will preview this. It's not really gonna change much because the resolution is pretty low. We see, for the most part, we know that images are made up of pixels that are technically rectangular, colored squares. So you see, when you have something that has low resolution, this is also probably a poor quality photo, it looks like, as well. When you have something that's poor resolution, you see those pixels. So the number of pixels given per inch, when they talk about PPI, is pixels per inch. Technically different than DPI, dots per inch. Pixels per inch and dots per inch are not theoretically, but they are different. They're very, very similar, so that's why a lot of people get those two confused. PPI is essentially a printing and output term. So you have PPI is pixels per inch, and that basically talks about the resolution. And then again, the effective resolution refers to the size of the resolution based on the actual size, physical size of the image within the document. So this image is about 5 by 5.5. So you'll see here the actual resolution is 144 PPI, where the effective resolution as it's being used right now is 130 PPI, which isn't great, isn't fantastic, but so you can resize these if you need to resize or make modifications in Photoshop to correct resolution issues, or resize it within the document. Hopefully, let's back out a little bit. Oops, wrong way. Back out a little bit. And you see I made the image a lot smaller. So that changed the effective PPI to 247 because I made the image smaller. So this is where I talk about, like, you know, if you have a low res image, you can get away with a lower resolution based on the size. So now the size is, you know, let's say we'll make it 3. Oh, let's lock those proportions. 3 by whatever this ends up being, 3 by almost 3 3/4. So you see our effective PPI is 247. So it takes a little bit of getting used to. I know it's kind of like a convoluted theory, but effective resolution basically is the viewing resolution based on the size of the image within the document. So again, if you have this like super, super small, you can get it close to 300 DPI, which is generally what you use for print. For print is you would like things to be 300 DPI at the size you're going to print them at. You get the most effective resolution that way. Images should be created at the correct output for optimum resolution, meaning, you know, if you want something to be 5 by 5 at full resolution, you want it to be 5 inches by 5 inches at 300 PPI is going to be the most optimal resolution. Again, they can be resized either in InDesign or within Photoshop. You can resize images, but there is still a loss in quality, even if you go, like, it happens a lot. Again, I'm throwing my clients under the bus, but it happens a lot where we work with clients where we'll say, you know, this image doesn't have enough resolution. It's not high enough. So then they go into Photoshop and they just go, okay, so they change 72 to 300. There you go. It's 300 DPI now. Like, that's not how it works. You still need to have. You're basically losing. You're messing with the pixels. You can't just like add resolution arbitrarily to a file. If you had again, let's say go back to something is, you want it to print 5 by 5. I'm trying not to reverse this. If you want something to print 5 by 5, it needs to be 300 DPI. So if you had something that was 10 by 10, but it was only 150, if you knock that down physically to 5 by 5, the pixels would reinterpolate and go from 150 to 300. You're changing the effective PPI within Photoshop. We play with it a little bit. I know it's kind of a convoluted theory to wrap your brain around, but you can change the effective PPI within Photoshop. You basically just need, again, you need to have the resolution for the size that you want to print. So whenever you change any kind of PPI or DPI within Photoshop, it creates, a lot of times it just creates new pixels. Like sometimes it will essentially copy a pixel right next to the other pixel, and it will make what looks like a better resolution photo, but it's really just kind of like copying and pasting pixels right next to each other. And that process is actually called interpolation. So it basically bases the color of new pixels on the color information around where the original pixels. So it kind of, sometimes if you're doing it in very, very small quantities or increments, you can get away with reinterpolating a photo. But if you're doing like huge steps, like if you want to take something that's, again, 5 by 5 and make it 20 by 20, it's just not going to work. The interpolation is going to be too much, and you're going to have image breakdown, and then you're going to have your crazy pixelated images. You can place, going back to placing images or placing files, you can place, which we've worked with before, just about any kind of document. You can place text, you can place vector graphics. Let's go to this lab.ai. And you place it just like you would place anything else. Let's throw that lab graphic right here. So we're placing that Illustrator vector graphic. Vector graphics versus, even though you're placing them, vector graphics versus raster-based graphics like Photoshop files versus Illustrator files, we can size this however big we want, and it's not going to lose resolution because the effective resolution basically isn't a thing. You'll see here in our link info, since it knows it's a vector file, there is no, we'll see on our list, there is no resolution, effective resolution, because it doesn't apply. Vector graphics work differently. They are based on vectors rather than pixels. So when we make that a lot bigger, I pretty much almost doubled the size, and you can see there's no breakdown whatsoever because it's not based on pixels. It's based on vectors, where it's basically filling. It's using an algorithm to fill color between vectors, points on within the document. It's all math and code. But basically, it's not based on pixels. It's based on vectors, so that you can size a vector graphic as big as you want, and you're not going to have to worry about resolution issues. It's kind of similar how text works. Text is essentially vector graphics. So when you make a font, if you have this font at 2 point versus 102 points, there's no resolution issues because text is a vector graphic. So you can link, you can place linked vector files within a InDesign document, or you can also copy and paste them, since InDesign and Illustrator, or any other vector graphic program you're working with, it will recognize a vector graphic as just a straight up graphic. Generally, I I tend to like to place images because again, if you're making any kind of changes, let's say for argument's sake, we have this lab. It's a, let's say this is an official logo for a magazine, and we want to use a green version. Instead of having the image placed, or rather copied and pasted, and making the changes each time you open a document, having to use your direct select tool, and you select the yellow and you change it to green, you select the A, change it to green and B. You can have different versions of the logo. Like let's say you wanted in Illustrator, you have a green one, a red one, a blue one, whatever. For this document, you want to use the blue one. You go, okay. You go to the lab thing, you hit this, your linked image. You go to your linked image, and let's say for argument's sake, there's a, where we go here. Let's say there's a lab blue. So you go to the lab blue and you hit open, and then you replace that lab blue, so you don't have to go changing it every single time. You don't have to go into each component if it was a copied and pasted graphic. That's why I tend to like to place all of my images and documents within InDesign because of that linked image feature. Again, if you have a full color, 2-color, and black and white logo, which I use a lot for one of my clients, when they're running ads, it's a black and white ad, I can easily just pop in their black and white logo instead of physically changing within the file, changing their logo to black and white. I could just relink to the black and white image. Let's see. Copy and paste it, or you can place. Lastly, we will show you, let me go back a couple steps, and we're going to be working with, there we go. We're going to be working with a little bit interface InDesign with Photoshop. So working with placed images within InDesign, if you have certain things in the Photoshop file, like clipping paths, any kind of working paths or alpha channels, which we go into in the book, you can essentially get rid of. We've worked with it a little bit in the last assignment where we chose the clipping path around the dog that was standing with the text around it. We chose the clipping path that was there to have that text flow around the path nicely. You can also get rid of, let's say we want to just get rid of this white. InDesign, working with Photoshop tools, has a clipping path option. If you have an image that's fairly simple, like this, we have a pretty strong image against a white background, a nice solid background. You can go to Object, Clipping Path, and you have your clipping options here. You can have it detect edges, which it basically looks for the major differences between, again, I said this works really well when you have like a nice strong graphic against a plain background. So you can have it detect edges. So now basically it's not perfect because you see we have a little bit of white here, a little bit of white here. If you bring down the tolerance, you can see now that got rid of the tolerance. So you can play with the threshold, which is basically how selective it's going to be, how picky it's going to be between edges. So like we have our threshold like way high, so it's going to be super picky. So the differences basically between the edges of what you're selecting, it's going to be way more picky. So it's going to have to be super dark for it to actually clip out. So you can see as we go back and we drop down that threshold, yeah, right? PD, let's go back, there we go. So if the threshold is 0, obviously it's not going to make any distinction between the edges and the white. And you can see even since we have such a strong, let's see what happens when we just type 1. Yeah, since we have such a strong distinction between the background and the main part of the image, even just putting that threshold at 1, obviously if we unclick preview, you can see it makes a huge difference. So you can you know, you can choose to tighten up that threshold if you, yeah, you can see we're starting to lose his shoulder here a little bit. So let's say like there's a little bit of white here, but it's kind of off-white because it's in between his ear and his collar there. You know, we'll bump that up to like 20. And you see it kind of starts to eat in there a little bit. So it's basically, you know, there we go. So we lose a little bit of the image in here and here. It's basically just kind of deciding what, you know, what you're, I guess, comfortable with. Comfortable with losing, playing with that threshold. And again, the tolerance is going to either tighten it up. It's going to be based on that path. So the higher the tolerance, the looser the path. You can see our path points, we have a lot less, and we have more white here, more white here. Generally, for something like this, you would have the tolerance at 0. The more paths, the better, because it clips to those paths. So if you have a 0 tolerance, it's not basically not allowing you any give between paths. So we can hit OK and then uncheck that, and now we have a nice, you know, pretty nice simplified sort of puppy, yeah, silhouetted edge there. The other things that you can do when you choose your clipping path or clipping path options is, so that's just simply detecting edges. It's a nice simple way to, again, to separate a foreground from a background. Alpha channels, I don't think there's any alpha channels in here. There's only one. Alpha channels are basically color channel info that's within Photoshop. Again, you would save all of this within. We get into actually making them later in the book, but these files have some of them built in already. But basically, they're color channel info that you can set within Photoshop and then select whichever ones. Like if you had one alpha channel that was the whole thing, and you had another alpha channel that like cut off right under his chin or something like that, you could call it like, you know, Petey's head, and then select that one. You can also do it by Photoshop path. There's only one path because it's just one. And basically it uses that simplified Photoshop path you can see. Similar to detecting edges, but in Photoshop you can refine it a little bit better. And then a user modified path, which is not letting us select because it's not an option for this image. You can modify the path yourself within InDesign, but generally we'd be using a detect edges or Photoshop path or alpha channels to sort of create this clipping mask around our images, and then you can have the text flow. You know, you can have your text flow nicely, around the graphic, and then fit it kind of like we did before. You know, the standing dog. You can have that text either flow tighter or looser around that that document. So basically, alpha channels are they're essentially different silhouettes that you can save within Photoshop. So you have, you know, again, if you have a silhouette that's just, you have an alpha channel that's the whole dog, or you have an alpha channel that's just his head, you can do that and save those in alpha channels in Photoshop, and then you can load those. Later. Again, sorry, just going through my notes here. Lastly, working with transparent backgrounds. I kind of did it a little bit before. We'll place that. If you have a Photoshop file that you want like a nice feathered out background, I have to find which one it was. There we go. There we go. So this image was here, I'll move it to our, oops. This image was you know, you can see obviously the full the full image frame, but they've feathered out the background and made this kind of nice-ish fade of color, and you can see it kind of the blue sort of fades out into the blue background. We work with one of the assignments and exercises work with like a greenish fade. You can do all this in Photoshop and feather out the backgrounds and save transparencies. Save your Photoshop file with a transparent background and keep it as a layered Photoshop document, and place that layered Photoshop document within InDesign, and you can keep those keep that transparency within Photoshop. It's a little bit, I wouldn't say trickier, but it doesn't handle as well in Illustrator. This is one of the other things that InDesign really excels at, is working with transparencies, within a document and printing those transparencies. It works way better than Illustrator does, and handles a lot more documents and a lot more transparency features than Illustrator does. But these are changes that you would do within Photoshop. You would open this image in Photoshop, feather the background as much as you want to feather and get rid of, and then you would save it as a layered Photoshop document with a transparent background, and then you can place that again into your document, and it keeps that transparency and that sort of feathered background, nice fading look within your InDesign document. So that is the basics of, again, very basics, the basics of working with placed images, simplifying edges, and working with basic clipping paths within InDesign, and also working with linked images within, now we have that's right, I ended that. Working with linked images and relinking files, organizing links and files within InDesign.